Dreadbox Typhon. Dreadbox has taken a 2 oscillator analog synth and smashed it down into this small, inexpensive package. So I'm going to take you through the various functions and how the synthesizer sounds when it's going through those functions to give you a sense of how effectively Dreadbox has taken a 2 oscillator analog synthesizer and smashed it into this tiny, inexpensive box. Okay, as you probably could tell from the title, we're going to start off with the oscillators. Now, this is a really novel application of oscillator functionality entirely controlled by 2 knobs, which is creative. Basically, Dreadbox has given you a selection of 2 oscillator waveform combinations or single examples of waveforms for you to choose from that are probably the ones you would likely use anyway. And it's given you this tune knob, which typically serves the purpose of detuning and also giving you up to an octave of semitones in each direction. So now I'm going to start off going through all of the waveform combinations. And why? Because this is not a switch. It's an actual continuously variable knob. So there are things that exist between these settings, which are really cool. So you have even more functional possibilities than you would think. So let's start right off. Right now I have it set to these 2 sawtooth shaped waves. And now you might think that would represent 2 sawtooths, but you'd be totally, okay, no, it actually does represent 2 sawtooths. They sound like this. You can hear them phasing against each other, and why? Because they're analog. It's difficult to get them completely perfectly in tune, which is exactly what you want in an analog oscillator. So we have both oscillators are set to the same sawtooth wave, and they are in the same octave. So if we come down here to the tuning, we can demonstrate, at least initially here, to give you a sense of what happens with the tune knob. So I'm going to turn it to the right. So now the 2 oscillators, there's some detuning between them, and then it'll go from the detuning straight into intervals. And you'll notice on that last note, on the octave, it gives you the opportunity to detune that octave as well. So yeah, you can detune not only the unisons, but also the octaves. And of course, you get the same thing in the opposite direction. A little bit of detuning. Okay, so this tuning knob is marked Tune 2 because this knob specifically tunes Oscillator 2. Oscillator 1 and 2 are controlled by MIDI, so you're always going to be in tune. This isn't a synthesizer you're going to have to tune because it is set up to tune itself to MIDI, but you do have the opportunity to tune Oscillator 2 to whatever you need it to be, whether that's an interval or detuning, or if you want to tune Oscillator 2 to something that is out of tune with MIDI. Okay, so we've pretty much heard I will go through and show you the various octaves that you can hear of these 2 sawtooth waves shortly. But first, I want to talk about what happens in these gaps between the oscillator waveform combinations. Okay, so you'll see a sawtooth and then a 2 after it. That doesn't mean 2 sawtooths. We've already got 2 sawtooths. This means that the setting is the second oscillator playing a sawtooth. So if we set it straight to it, you can hear it. But not so fast. it's not that you would just switch from these two oscillators to this single sawtooth oscillator. There's variance between them. So let's go backwards, back towards the two sawtooths. By turning the knob artfully, you can add the other octave, the other oscillator in to whatever degree you would like. Now, since this is oscillator 2, any tuning you do with the tune knob is going to be actually oscillator 2. So the oscillator 1 fades in and out as you go between these two settings. And if you had, say, oscillator 2 set to a fifth, on this setting, when you got to sawtooth 2, you'd be playing the fifth. So, which might be alarming if you're expecting it to be playing in the key that your oscillator 1 is set to, and it wouldn't be. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we have the same thing that happens between the single iteration of the sawtooth on oscillator 2 going to a setting that is a square wave and a sawtooth. We had them, so I didn't have it perfectly in tune, and you wouldn't know if you could only hear oscillator 2, because oscillator 2 can totally be tuned to whatever you want it to be. But now we have, and you heard the fade between oscillator 2 playing a single sawtooth, and now oscillator 2 playing a sawtooth and oscillator 1 playing a square wave. And the same thing happens as we move from this setting to the square wave, which is oscillator 1. So basically between this setting, which is oscillator 2 playing a sawtooth, this setting, which is oscillator 1 playing a square and oscillator 2 playing a sawtooth, and this setting, which is oscillator 1 playing a square, you're basically sliding between the two oscillators set to the two different waveforms as you move between these three settings. So then the cool thing is, okay, here's your square wave, oscillator 1, which will always be in tune. You can't detune it. So if you want a single oscillator that's always in tune and playing a square wave, this is where you'd go. But the cool thing that happened is that Dreadbox has given you the ability to change the pulse width as you move to the left. So just to the left of this setting, about halfway through, you have a range of pulse width. So later when you are modulating, you're modulating the wave, because you can modulate this knob. You can actually set it and find a place where you're generating pulse width modulation. And then we move on to oscillator 1 playing that same square wave and a triangle. So you have the square wave and then you have that deeper low end of the triangle. And then we'll move away from that to oscillator 2 just playing a triangle. And remember, you can always detune while these are happening. So that was me detuning the triangle that is oscillator 2. Now we'll move straight down to just oscillator 2 playing its triangle. And it sounds like we're actually getting, is that true? Am I going crazy? I think we're actually getting pulse width modulation, not modulation, but pulse width variance as we move towards the triangle. Let's listen to that again. So yeah, you also, this is cool. I didn't notice this before. You also get square wave. You get the pulse width variants that you can generate. So you can be playing with a pulse instead of a 50% duty cycle square. As you move to the left of the setting of triangle and square, just like you get it when you move from to the left of oscillator 1 just playing a square. So right there we have a pulse and a triangle, which is cool. And then we'll arrive at the triangle. So there's your triangle, and then we move towards something crazy. Okay, what we have going on in FM, if I'm right, I think this is still oscillator 1 playing a square wave, and then the triangle of oscillator 2, instead of being played with the square wave, is now frequency modulating oscillator 1's square wave. So if you have it perfectly in tune, or as perfect as you can get with analog oscillators, you just get this nice sound, which is pretty cool. But then as you turn the tuning knob, you're not getting a detuning or a change of frequency. Well, you are getting a change of frequency in oscillator 2, but then the frequency of oscillator 2 is frequency modulating oscillator 1. So you can get some really raucous sounds with that. Which is really, really cool. So that is essentially what we're looking at when we look at the oscillator.